so much for joining us. I will hand over to our esteemed CEO to do a little introduction, and then we'll get rocking and rolling. Otto, floor is yours.
Thanks, Nats. Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a little while since we've done one of these, but be assured that we have plenty more exciting content that we are preparing for you guys in the coming months. And it's exciting to see so many of you joining us this afternoon. We had a really, really good response. I know there might be some challenges here and there relating to load shedding, but it's just another thing we're learning to live with. So I'm not going to hold you up for too long. Suffice to say that this presentation comes directly off the back of our 21st Century Travel Agent version 2.0 report that we released early April of this year. It is a phenomenal document which will really, really give you insight and context in terms of where we find ourselves as an industry, but more importantly, where your customers find themselves and what it is that they are looking for. And this is one of a number of webinars where we're going to guide you through how we believe we can further support you in being there for the customer and what their needs and expectations are, and to deliver on what we believe is a small window of opportunity that we really need to grasp with both hands at this early stage of post-COVID pandemic. So it's wonderful to see so many of you, and it's lovely to be part of this session. And I'm very excited to hand you over to you to Natalie or Natalia, and she will take you through a really, really awesome view on how you can present your value proposition, not only to existing customers, but also to potentially new customers. So Nats, thank you so much.
Thanks, Otto, and thank you all for joining us today. I do see a few familiar names. You will have seen kind of part of this presentation before, so forgive me if I am belaboring the same point, but I really do believe that we have a very unique opportunity at the moment to leverage the goodwill that we have managed to cobble together during COVID, as lots of people were stranded, and we stepped in, we leaned in, and we helped people. So we have a unique opportunity, I think, at the moment to leverage that, and part of that is really understanding our value proposition. But you know, what is a value proposition? Because it's a really big word that we kind of talk about, but might not know exactly what that means, and then also how to define what that value proposition is for you, how to promote that value proposition. And lastly, what I'm going to do is to talk to you about something called talk triggers, which I find fascinating, and I'm hoping that you will find fascinating too. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully you will all be able to see my PowerPoint. If not, just throw on the chat that you can't, and I'll start seeing the screaming chat messages and I'll reshare. All right, so let's talk about value proposition. We all know that during COVID, there's been this tsunami of change, and we have this super digitalization across all industry. Those of us who perhaps were not very digitally minded pre-COVID have now been forced into a digitalized space. If you think about the extent to which we're all shopping online now, much more now than before COVID, you'll understand that even my 68-year-old mother has discovered the joy that is Take-A-Lot, much to my father's chagrin. So we've really jumped forward 5 years, and part of the tsunami of change that we've seen during COVID is that our clients are expecting flexibility. They want us to move heaven and earth, and anybody who's been struggling with the visa situation over the last couple of months will know that that is very, very, very difficult. But in the face of all of that challenge, in the face of the digitalization, in the face of strikes in Europe, in the face of not getting visas on time, in the face of having third parties let our travelers down during COVID, what has happened is that there is the sense of goodwill towards a travel expert so that they can travel with peace of mind, which has always been ASATA's value proposition. So what we've experienced in this last year is what everybody is referring to as forced digitalization. It's not something many of us wanted, but we have been forced into position. Those who were behind had no choice but to catch up, because that is just the way that the world has worked. More screen time. So those of you who are going down a rabbit hole of TikTok every day, and Insta Reels will understand exactly what it is that I mean here. You think, oh, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes on TikTok, and half an hour goes by and you've already spent 30 minutes of your life. Looking at Reels, WhatsApp, where we get information from and how we get information. Those communities have shrunk. You guys will all have people in your lives where you are getting information from a trusted source. If you think about the extent to which we used to rely on other channels to get our information, and now, you know, if you want a good dentist, if you want to know the best preschool for your child to be enrolled in, you start looking at your small communities for advice. And so this idea of word of mouth has become, it was big pre-COVID, it is now even bigger as a result of our communities having shrunk. And we're all on TV streaming, we're all on Amazon Prime, we're all on Netflix. That's where we're getting information from. We're not looking at adverts the way that we used to look at. Those of you who have dabbled in the metaverse will understand that this is very much a reality for our very young generation. I'll share with you that a couple of weeks ago, my 5-year-old nephew put me onto Roblox, and I had never been on it before. He can't even write, but he is immersed in that world. And in the next 5 to 10 years, this will very much be part of our world. So we really have to start thinking about how our brands, how our personal brands, how our company brands are starting to interact in that metaverse space, because that is where our next generation will be getting their information from. As I mentioned, flexibility is key. So with this uncertainty is this need for flexibility and having to move the goalposts and being comfortable moving the goalposts. We know that those booking windows have been short, but as trust returns, they will lengthen, and we are already to a certain extent seeing a lengthening of those short booking windows. And the resolution of issues, empathy, and flexibility remain key. Our clients before COVID, and this was borne out in our first 21st century study, but it certainly has come out in the second iteration thereof, is that they expect you to put them first and really understand why they are choosing to travel. Not so much the fact that they are traveling, but what is the motivating force behind the travel, behind where they're traveling, behind with whom they're traveling. So this might be a physical or emotional driver. It might just be common sense from a logistical imperative. So those of us that were, and I count myself among this type of person, where in COVID, I spent a lot of time with my pets, and I feel so incredibly guilty when I have to travel and I leave my pets behind. So this idea that if I am traveling locally, that I can look for a property that welcomes pets, so that I can take my pets along with me. Those successful brands understand what those drivers are behind the scenes. Start thinking about what those drivers are behind the scenes, and that informs how they change their marketing, but it also how they change what it is that they have to offer, what their operational differentiator is. And I'll talk about talk triggers in a little while, because talk triggers very much link to how you operate differently. They're not a marketing stunt. They're an operational differentiator that you can put in your business. So you can specialize in a specific area that very much taps into a physical or an emotional need, the driver behind why someone is traveling. So I mentioned this return to the travel advisor, and why? Why is that? Because we delivered peace of mind during COVID. We have this ability to deliver peace of mind in an environment that is still very unstable and fraught with friction. Our industry collaborated for our recovery, and we have this ability now to focus on the whole customer journey, to remove the friction, to shape our business for this new customer, to focus on risk management, not just in a corporate travel space where duty of care has always been important, but in a leisure space where duty of care has become all the more important. But we have to commit to that change, and we have to work on something called our real skills. So what are our real skills? I define our real skills as something that a machine cannot do. And we, in our little organization, we do a real skills training session every 2 weeks for the team. And it's the stuff around how to be more productive, how to handle conflict, how to lead with empathy, how to have a difficult conversation. These are all skills that machines do not have, that humans do have. And we understand that in the space of travel, technology does a lot of the things, a lot of the functional things, the routine things that we would have done in the past. So the real skills really are an opportunity for us to differentiate ourselves from technology so that we are providing that peace of mind that our and that flexibility and the agility that our customers are looking for at the moment. We also know that there's a lot of noise. Coming out of COVID, there are lots of destinations that are vying for the attention of our customers. There are a lot of products that are vying for their attention. So in the space where there is a lot of noise, there is a lot of content, there's a lot of stuff happening on TikTok, on Insta. If you think about sitting in the car and driving to work, all of those different touch points that you are experiencing as a consumer of information, vying for your attention, it would be trite for you to assume that just because you are you, that you're going to get people's attention. You've got to find a way of rising above the noise, clearing beyond the noise, and making sure that your customer understands your value proposition. And for that to happen, it needs to be very clear, and it needs to be shaped from the perspective of the customer. What is in it for them? Why should they care about what you have to offer? And I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, how you define that value proposition, leading with benefit as opposed to leading with what it is that you want to say. Essentially, what you want to get to is a stage of understanding why someone would talk about you, not just because you've asked them to talk about you, and how you can inspire them to talk about you to their colleagues, to their friends. Because remember, where we're getting information from is now no longer a billboard. It is now no longer a TV ad. It is word of mouth from very small communities. So how do we craft this value proposition? What is a value proposition? A value proposition answers the question, what makes your organization, or what makes you special? What makes you different? So let's just sit with that for a moment. Can you think about what it is that makes you special? And often the answer to that is in the feedback that you are already getting from your customers, what your customers are telling you about you in a testimonial, on social media, in an email to you, providing feedback on your service. So what is it that you do that is special, that no one else does, that your customers are remarking on? Just think about that. So I'm going to go straight into finding that point of relevance. And this Venn diagram is a really great exercise for you to do on a blank piece of paper if you haven't done it before. So we have two circles, and normally what happens with a brand, almost always what happens with a brand, sits here on the right-hand side. So when you're in marketing, you start thinking, okay, what is it that I want to say? What do I care about? What is the thing that I offer? Sometimes our customers care, but only if it solves a problem that they have. So generally what we do is we start with our audience. If you were going to draw this diagram, you would start with a circle on the left. What does your customer care about? What problem are they trying to solve? And you're probably going to say, well, they're traveling, so there's no problem. They're traveling. But remember that a person travels because there is an unmet need. That unmet need might be to attend a business meeting. That unmet need might be to reconnect with a loved one. That unmet need might be to celebrate something significant in their life. That unmet need might be just a change of scenery. So what is it that they are trying to solve through travel? Write that down on the left-hand side. Then have a look at what it is that you do, what that thing is that makes you special, that solves that particular problem. and write that down in the right-hand side. You will eventually get to a point where those two circles intersect. So what it is that you do that makes you special, that solves their problem. And that is your point of relevance. So in my world, in my marketing world, if I wanted to go out and say, I run Big Ambitions, and Big Ambitions are a travel and tourism marketing firm, your first question as the customer is going to be, so what? I haven't differentiated to you how I solve your problem. But if I said to you, and I started with, I know that you need to rise above the noise. I know that it's a very noisy space in travel at the moment, and I specialize in the travel and tourism industry. So I understand what your customers are going to care about, and I understand your business without you needing to explain your business to me. I have tapped very specifically into your pain point, and I've told you how it is that I'm going to solve your problem. So try and draw this on a piece of paper and start with your audience insight, because you have to lead with the problem that it is that they're trying to solve before you actually start talking about how you solve it. So you can ask yourself questions like, your customer, who is your customer? And really get to grips with who your customer is. Don't try and be all things to all people, because you will not succeed and your value proposition will not be clear. Who is your ideal target customer? What do they care about? What do you sell that your customer cares about? So what is your offer that your customer cares about? And lastly, what is the benefit that they will derive from using you? Now, what do I mean by benefit instead of a feature? Again, it's about flipping the message. So you will say to me, I am a tour operator and I sell Indian Ocean Island holidays. That's great. That's what you want to say. Who is your customer? Your customer potentially is a honeymoon couple that are wanting to travel somewhere amazing for their honeymoon. What is it that you sell to that customer? What is it that they need from that holiday? What are the drivers of that holiday? They want to spend time on their own. They want to have the experience of a lifetime. They have a very tight budget. They are adventurous, so they want to do something adventurous. What is it that you sell that speaks to those particular drivers? And what you sell is not just a package to Mauritius or a package to the Seychelles. What are the benefits that they are going to derive from using you? So will there be peace of mind because you have sorted out all their visas? Will you make sure that the accommodation that you have offered them has some particular value add that they wouldn't have derived from anyone else? Will they be able to relax in private? Will they feel like they're the only people on earth, et cetera, et cetera? So what are the things that they're looking for, and what are the benefits that they're going to derive having gone with you, having chosen you, essentially? And this happened a lot during COVID, was this idea of helping to sell, not just inspire. So we talk a lot in travel about beautiful visual assets, beautiful videos, beautiful photos to inspire people to travel. But what we tapped into really well as travel advisors during COVID, and often not for any gain, was to help people, to give away a little bit of the farm so that they understood that you were the right person to help them, that you developed some level of trust so that they knew that you were the person who really had their interests at heart. So it goes beyond just flighting beautiful photography and videos on your social media and showing your customer an amazing brochure. It's about tapping into helping them, to persuade them that you are the person that they should trust with their particular holiday. And it's through that that you build credibility. It's a long game. It's not a short game. Trust is earned. And so you have to do that on a drumbeat continuously. How can you help to sell so that you build credibility, not just with them, but that they feel that they trust you enough to refer you to their customers? So those traditional marketing techniques that we used to use, even, talking about social media, they don't work anymore. Everything has changed. And we've been forced now to adapt to that current situation and to go digital to remain competitive. But when you go digital, it is about building an emotional connection, and it is about building trust. It is not about tick the box. It is not about saying, I need to post on social media 3 times a week, so I'm going to thumbsuck and post a whole bunch of really nice photographs. It's about understanding what's going to emotionally resonate with the customer who is wanting to make a decision to travel. So they are a little bit lower down in the funnel than just in inspiration phase. So understanding where it is that you can provide that emotional touch point is a really good thing for you to do. And again, whip out a piece of paper and think about the most relevant digital touch points that you could have with your traveler in various stages of their buying journey. So what are those stages of a buying journey? And I've mentioned one, which is the inspiration phase, where you kind of just fishing, you're just hooking. And the more you get to know your customer, and the more you get to know where it is that they are fishing, the more targeted you can be with your message based on what it is that you have decided will resonate with them emotionally. If you know that your customer is a family that is already quite a long way down their buying journey, where do you reach that particular customer? And what information can you provide them? So remember, help to sell that will engender trust that you are the right partner for them at that particular time. So the stages of that travel journey, and many of you will have seen that already, are inspiration. And that is literally the Insta reel that you've posted, or perhaps it is a newsletter that you're sending out. This is fishing in a very, very, very big pond. The next phase, they've started planning, where they're looking for recommendations and they're planning their routes and spots they will visit. And this area here, planning, is a really good place for you to start developing some content and some marketing that helps them understand what the best options are for them. So it goes a little bit more in depth. It explains to them why Mauritius is better for this type of traveler and Seychelles is better for that type of traveler. You're giving away a little bit of the farm so that they can see that you are the thought leader in the space and that you are worth trusting. At the booking phase, now they're starting to look at doing their reservation. And here, transparency is the name of the game. So what are the friction points that the person potentially has to booking with you? Here you start looking at things like testimonials to get them over the line, why they should book with you and not with someone else. Here you are starting to persuade them that you are the right partner for them. Okay, so inspiration, big pond, we're all fishing, we're just throwing mud on a wall and we're hoping someone will look at what we've put up there and they'll be inspired to go to the next step. Planning, we start helping to sell. So we start giving away some of the farm, we start sharing, we start comparing places, comparing experiences so that we help them with the planning process. In the booking phase, this is about persuading them that you are the right person for them, essentially. And then once they're in the destination and enjoying the experience that you have put together for them, they will then go into that sharing phase. So you really only have influence at inspiration, at planning, and at booking. And your approach needs to be different at each of these particular steps. I'm going to skip that slide because it's a very busy slide. But what I do want to do is to go into something called talk triggers. And some of you on the call will have heard me talk about talk triggers previously. And I think this is the most exciting part of marketing for us as travel advisors at the moment, because it is the strongest thing we could potentially do, having garnered so much goodwill over the last 2 years. So what percentage of purchases are caused by word of mouth? So you'll be sitting there now and thinking, well, it'll be really high, really, really high. And you are going to be very surprised to see that only 19% of purchases are caused by word of mouth. But what percentage of purchases are influenced by word of mouth? This is a much higher percentage. 90% of purchases are influenced by word of mouth. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to leverage the fact that people have the power. Your customers have the power. And there are 4 types of customers in this world. We have the experienced advisors who enjoy sharing their experiences with others. They are more likely to proactively recommend brands and to use social media to do so. And you guys all have these people in your networks. They're the guy on the WhatsApp group that pipes up immediately when someone says, does anyone know of blah, blah, blah? Does anyone know where I can find blah, blah, blah? These guys love to look clever. Then we have the uniqueness seekers. These guys are the ones that seek out and remain loyal to brands which offer something unique. They have very high expectations of companies, but once a company has nabbed them, it's really difficult for that company to lose them. Then we have our fundamental fans who are very intently focused on a company's ability to consistently deliver a great product or service. So this is about consistency, where this is about brand. So here, a uniqueness seeker is probably someone that is an Apple fan, whereas the company's ability to consistently deliver a great product or service, this is probably something that's a commodity, that if that brand fails, they're going to move on to something else because it didn't satisfy them. And lastly, and you'll see this is the biggest percentage, 30% are skeptics. They are more likely to believe that companies' attempts to be unique are merely gimmicks. They don't trust anything. And these are the guys who are very difficult to influence, but are very easily influenced through word of mouth. So these guys are the ones that you're going to capture their attention through word of mouth marketing. And all of you are probably sitting there thinking, yes, we know word of mouth is the holy grail. And yes, absolutely, word of mouth is what we want to go after. But how many of you sitting on this call actually have a word of mouth strategy? You actively look to get your customers to refer you. So what does that look like? Is that a Hello Peter referral? Is that a Google testimonial? Is that something that you ship onto your website? Not really. A word of mouth strategy is more anecdotal and inspired by the person without you actually having to ask them. And you will do it yourself. You will discuss different and ignore average. So when you're sitting at a braai, think about when you're sitting in a braai and you're talking to someone about an experience that you've had with a brand. You will not pipe up and say, well, I've just had this perfectly adequate experience flying on airline A. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that my 5:45 flight this morning was anything other than adequate. I'm not going to rave about it. I'm not going to go, wow, it was awesome. But I might discuss the very different coffee that was on board. And someone like Lyft, for example, has really invested in talk triggers, like having pets on board, for example, or having a Vita coffee on board. That is a talk trigger. But just serving the average cup of coffee on board, I'm not going to talk about that at a braai. So that is not a talk trigger. And many of us think that if we do this little surprise and delight for a little while, that we're going to get people to talk about us. And we do for a very short period of time. But again, it's not a strategy. It's not something that you can continue on for a long period of time. Just think about those little surprise and delight stunts that you get, if you're like, I don't know, I'm thinking of Checkers with those little herb garden things. Those were really cool at a certain point in time. That's a surprise and delight. It's not a full-time strategy. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what a talk trigger is in a minute. But also remember our skeptics. They are deeply suspicious, and you will know your customers all think, well, this is too good to be true. So anything that is inconsistent breeds contempt. So if you're going to do something as a talk trigger, it needs to be done on a drumbeat. It needs to be done consistently Because if you don't do it consistently, what you're going to do is break a promise, and you're going to create the opposite of a talk trigger, or at least you're going to create a talk trigger, but it's going to be a negative talk trigger. And experiences that sound too good to be true will create suspicion. So it has to be something that's really easily implemented, really doable, and really believable. So let's take you through that again. Right. Remember, at a BRI, we discuss different and we ignore average. I'm not going to refer a brand at a BRI in a conversation if you just do what everyone else does. Surprise and delight is a stunt. It's not a long-term strategy. If you are inconsistent, what you're going to do is to get the negative talk trigger, which is not what we want. And lastly, if the experience sounds too good to be true, it's going to be suspicious, and it's not going to be a talk trigger. So what is a talk trigger? A talk trigger is a strategic, operational differentiator that compels word of mouth. Okay, let's just sit with this for a second. This is not a communication stunt. This is not a mailer going out every week with a joke at the top. This is not you asking your customer for a referral that you chuck onto LinkedIn or on your website. This is someone sitting at a BRI who said, you know, I just had this amazing experience with brand X because they do X, X, and X. And I thought that was amazing because it tapped into what I needed, which was X, essentially. So it has to be an operational thing that you do in your business. It is not a communications thing. The communications talk to the operational differentiator that you have. And you can see that word compel is it inspires the person to talk about you. It is not you asking for that referral. A word of mouth strategy gives our customers something to talk about. And you will all know that there are brands that you talk about because they have a talk trigger. And we'll go through some examples in a minute. So the difference between a unique selling point and a talk trigger. A unique selling point talks to a feature. We offer X. A talk trigger talks to a benefit. I, as the consumer, have benefited because of that feature, whatever it is that feature is. A USP is discussed in a meeting or it's put on a website, and you guys will all have websites. You'll all have your USPs on a website. A talk trigger is discussed in an informal environment. It's when you're sitting at a BRI and somebody tells you about this incredible experience they have had with a particular brand because it was noteworthy. So there is a difference between the USP and a talk trigger. And there are 5 types of talk triggers. The first one is talkable empathy. So when your values are aligned with a particular customer's values, when you care so deeply about that customer that it is noteworthy and they know that you care about them so deeply. The second one is something called talkable usefulness. So this is an example of where what it is that you offer is so incredibly useful that it has become something that people will talk about. Generosity is an easy one for you. That is when you do something extra because frankly, very few other people are willing to do that something extra. And I'm just trying to think of an example of talkable generosity here. Maybe it is, for example, outsurance with their, when they give back, when you haven't claimed and you get some money out, for example. Another example of talkable generosity for me is Audible. I get a free Audible credit every single month, whether or not I've bought an audiobook. That's talkable generosity. Talkable speed. Now, this is a difficult one because our baseline expectation as consumers is for speed. And anyone who lives in Europe now will be very upset if Amazon Prime takes more than 6 hours to deliver what it is that they, have ordered essentially. But an example of talkable speed in the South African context might be the Checker 6060, for example. So they're saying they're going to get your groceries to you in 60 minutes. And you would talk about that at a braai, because if they achieve that, that's worth talking about. And lastly, talkable attitude. So when the brand's tone and personality is so talkable that you want to mention it at a braai. And an example of that would be someone like Nando's, for example. If Nando's sounded anything other than like Nando's sounds now, that would be jarring for you. So those are the 5 different types of talk triggers that we have. Talkable empathy, where someone or a brand cares deeply about you and they demonstrate that depth of empathy. And there again, as a travel advisor, that is something that you can hook into. Talkable usefulness, so the thing that you offer is so useful that it inspires them to talk about you. Generosity, speed, and attitude. So there are 4 shall we say, tests for you to define what it is that you're going to do in your own business to develop a talk trigger. It must be remarkable. So it must be something different. Remember when I said you can't expect people to talk about you if your experience is perfectly adequate. It needs to be different. It must be relevant. So it must be something that makes sense both to your business and to your consumer. It would be jarring if all of a sudden you were giving away cars, for example. It's got to be something that speaks to your business. It must be reasonable. So remember, anything that's too good to be true is going to generate skepticism. So it must be something that I can feel, okay, yeah, there must be some truth in this, so I can believe this. And lastly, it must be repeatable. Every single person that interacts with you must have this thing. It can't just be for people who connect with you between the hours of 5 and 7 in the evening, or only on Tuesdays, or only in the summer. It must be something that you do all the time for every single person that engages with you. So it must be different, must be remarkable. It must be relevant to your business and to your customer. It must be reasonable so that it does not generate skepticism. And it must be repeatable. So it must be something that every single person that engages with you gets, whether they're engaging with you today, tomorrow, next week, whether I'm spending 50 Rand with you, 500 Rand, or 50,000 Rand with you. What is that one thing? And how do you get to a point where you understand what your talk triggers are? And I'm very happy to share these talk triggers with you so that you can actually work through this presentation. Number one, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, is start looking at what your customers are telling you in the insights that you have. So what are they booking? What are they saying about you? What's in their testimonials? What are the questions that they're asking you on an ongoing basis? Really get to grips with what your customer, what the driving force behind them traveling, the driving force behind them using you, why they come back to you, why they choose to do business with you, why they stop doing business with you and they start doing business with your competitors. Start asking yourself questions about the engagement that you have with your customers. And then start playing around with some triggers, some talk triggers that you could potentially introduce into the mix. You know, DoubleTree has a very simple talk trigger. They give a warm chocolate chip cookie to any guest that arrives to check in at their property. Okay, now you're thinking, okay, great, I'm going to get a biscuit. But people will book with DoubleTree because of the talk trigger around the chocolate biscuit. So is it remarkable? Yes, it's different. No one else is doing it. Is it relevant? Yes, they're a hotel and they're wanting to define themselves as a hospitable brand. Is it repeatable? Yes, it's cheap as chips. Every single person that checks into DoubleTree will get a chocolate chip cookie. And is it reasonable? Yes, very. It's not a difficult thing to do. Is every likelihood that I'm going to get a chocolate chip cookie? There's absolutely no problem. You could define something in your service delivery as a talk trigger. Do you, I don't know, do you have a checklist that you send to every single customer before they travel so that so that you make sure and they make sure that they have everything they need before they go. And very often your talk trigger sits in a point of friction that your customer has said. So it's something along the lines of something that they experience that they complain about. So it really annoys me that I have to read through all these terms and conditions. Okay, so do you spend, is your talk trigger spending a half an hour with them running through each and every terms and conditions? I'm just chucking mud at a wall, but I'm trying to get you to start thinking about what your talk trigger could be. It normally sits in the point of friction that your customer is saying that they're having with travel. It might not be friction with your brand, but it might be something that annoys them about travel. The fact that they can't get their favorite seat, or that they struggle to get a visa, or whatever it is. Think about what those friction points are and what you potentially could do that would be remarkable, relevant, repeatable, and reasonable, that would help them solve that particular problem. And once you have come up with a few triggers, start testing them. Just test them out. Evaluate them after a couple of weeks and see how they're landing. If they're not, tweak them, discard them. If you tweak them, relaunch them with something slightly different. But you've got to play around to find that talk trigger. It's not necessarily something that's just going to pop out from open air. And I want you to think, when you are driving home tonight, or when you're watching TV, or even in the course of the next few days, what some of the brands that you engage with have as a talk trigger that inspire you, that operational difference that they have that inspires you to talk about them when they're not in the room. Just think about that. What are the brands that you admire, the brands that you talk about? It could be your dentist, that phones the day before and speaks to talkable empathy and makes sure that all your questions have been answered before you go in for that procedure. That's a great example of talkable empathy. Of course, you're going to refer that dentist, because he's doing something that nobody else does, essentially. I think, one more slide. Never underestimate the importance of testimonials and your personal brand. And I've done a little bit of a dive into this in the last couple of days, because somebody asked me why they should bother with their personal brand, why they should bother going on LinkedIn, why they should bother making sure that their social media and online presence is one that reflects a strong personal brand. And remember what I said about digitization right at the start. People are going to Google you. People are going to Google your brand, and they're going to see what other people that are like them are saying about your brand. So customer reviews are very important, and they can be personal reviews on your LinkedIn. So how many of you are sitting here with a LinkedIn profile that hasn't been updated, where you haven't sought out testimonials from your customers and you're not actively working your LinkedIn handle? It's the easiest thing to do, and it's the quickest thing to do. So if you're not doing that, please just go away, spend half an hour updating it, go and ask people, your customers, to provide a little testimonial on your LinkedIn. Think about the affiliated brands that you work with. So if you're a retail agent, who are the suppliers that you work with? Because if those suppliers are recognized and credible, it will stand you in good stead to associate yourself with them. Whether that's, on your email signature saying, these are some of the brands we work with, or on your website, these are some of the brands we work with. They give you credibility. Having any level of certification, like making sure that your ASATA logo is very clear on your social media, on your website, on your email signature, that is important. Any online user ratings like Hello Peter, or Google reviews, or Facebook reviews, people are going to remember at that planning stage, they're going to want to make sure that they're giving their money to the right person after you've inspired and after you've helped them plan. So make sure that when they search for you online, that you have a really strong online brand. And then lastly, the word of mouth, the personal recommendations. What can you change operationally in your business that is reasonable, repeatable, remarkable, that will inspire someone to talk about the engagement that it is that they've had with you in an informal environment without you having to have to ask for it. I won't talk about that. Yeah. Start with yourself. Start with your owned media. Start with your website. Start with your email signature. Start with your newsletters that you have power over, and make sure that you start putting your that credibility, that proof, that social proof into your owned media. Either way, the game has changed, guys. The pace is much faster. Our teams are much smaller. Many of our experienced staff have left. They've moved to other industries. We can see that there's pent-up demand. The environment is very fluid, and travelers have an expectation that you dabble in the digital space now more than ever, and be clever about it, because everybody is dabbling in the digital space. So you need to be agile. You need to be very quick. You need to be connected. You need to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is up to date if you're an ITC and it's your personal brand. If you're a brand, what are you doing on social media to make sure that you're connecting with your customers, and not just shouting at them, but really engaging with them? You need to be credible. So remember, help to sell to develop that credibility. And you need to be fast, because there are lots of brands that are vying for the same level of attention with the same level of noise that you are kind of all having to deal with right now. So that's pretty much it, guys. I'm happy to take any questions. I know that there was a lot of information in there, and if you are wanting to go through it again, or if you've got any questions after the fact, I'm also happy to hop on a call with you. I will also share the recording with you so that you can go through the talk triggers. But really, the takeaways for you guys today is make sure that you are leveraging your word of mouth more so than ever before. Find a talk trigger, map it on a piece of paper, and don't be afraid to experiment with it. And if you haven't started looking at how you can provide that social proof on your online owned platforms, start doing that. Start bringing in online reviews as much as possible, so that you generate that level of credibility, because you're in a red sea at the moment. And the only way really to do that is to differentiate yourself by getting other people to tell your good story, and how your value proposition has helped them. It's about them. It's not about you. So I'll leave it at that. I'll stop sharing. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Or everybody's sitting trying to sharpen their pencil and find their talk trigger.
Here we go, Nats.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank yous.
All good. And again, as I say, I'm really happy to have a chat with anybody. If you've got a talk trigger and you're like, oh, I'm not sure if that's going to fly, just chuck it on a WhatsApp and send it to me, and I'll say, no, have you been smoking your socks? Or yes, I think that's brilliant, do it. But start with something. In other words, start with something. Yeah.
And guys, we will obviously make this available to you through our resource center. So keep an eye out on the newsletters, and you'll have an opportunity to obviously see it all again. Nats, I think what might also be useful is if we share the presentation separately to this as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And, anybody who wants to read up on talk triggers, there's an amazing book by a guy called Jay Baer. I'll actually put it here in the chat for you. Who's like the godfather of talk triggers. And he's got a book which you can download, an ebook on Kindle or on your iPad, or also you can download an audio book called Talk Triggers. And he actually goes through lots of different examples of talk triggers. I'm really in love with the idea of talk triggers, because I think if you can get your customers, if you can do something so operationally different that you inspire your customers to talk about you at a braai, happy day,
Yeah. And I think there's an honesty about it, isn't there, Nats? I mean, there's one thing to spend money on marketing, and I'm not suggesting that you should write one off against the other. Yes. But, when you're looking for clients, there are multiple ways that you can go about this process. And I think the opportunity I think the necessity to ensure that you are creating talk triggers and getting some of your customers to talk about you is going to create so many incredible opportunities for you and your business. And all that it costs you is to spend a little bit of time of listening and engaging and sharing.
Yeah, and really being intentional about the fact that you need to have a word of mouth strategy, not just sitting in the room with your agents and saying, we need a word of mouth strategy, guys. Get into an open space and just put some white paper down and start chucking things on a page and say, okay, we are going to commit to this talk trigger. We're going to test it and we're going to see if it works, not just talking about it, I think. Yeah.
And I think, this is part of this window of opportunity that we speak about. I mean, part of these things you guys have been doing, and you do it every single day. But what you may not have done is communicated it or got other people to communicate it for you. So, it's not like you're trying to reinvent the wheel. This is just about you putting it into some sort of as Nat says, take a piece of paper and sketch it out, and can make you look exceptional, because you are exceptional and you are driving some really meaningful value that people will be prepared to pay for. So I think it's a very, very exciting message. And I think Talk Triggers is certainly an area of your marketing that you need to be putting into your ammunition, as it were. So I think, Nats, thank you so much for that very insightful talk. And yes, everybody, just to let you know, we have recorded this session. It will be made available to all of you, and we'll also make sure that the presentation is available for you to go through. And Nats, thank you so much for your kind offer, that if people have any questions or queries, that you are making yourself available to try and help them through that process.
Sure, anytime. And guys, don't forget to go to the resource center, because as much as we're doing these webinars, we're also doing a lot of real skill stuff on the resource center. So please do go, and if you can't remember where the resource center is, go to the website. And we'd also love some feedback from you on anything that you feel is missing that would help you grab that small window of opportunity. Yeah. So thanks, everyone. I hope you have a lovely evening, and we will chat soon. Thanks, Otto, for piggybacking off and joining us.
That was great. I said to Nats at the start that I'll be there at the beginning, but not at the end. But this is the second time I've seen this presentation, and it's just been so inspiring. So it was great to spend this time with all of you, and thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. Cheers.